After Piaget, we're going to look now at Lev Vygotsky, born in the same year in 1896, but born in Russia, and his working time as a psychologist was spent in the newly formed and somewhat anarchic Soviet Union. It's a remarkable thing that revolutions change all kinds of things, often for the bad, sometimes for the good. But one thing they do is they shake things up. And in the period after the formation of the Soviet Union, there was a huge flurry of intellectual activity that was remarkably interdisciplinary. And there's a whole body of work that emerged for over a period of about 5 or 10 years. And then things went to hell in a handbasket, and that creative urge that was associated with the time of revolution stopped. So there's many figures who worked in that sweet spot, and Vygotsky is one of them. We may meet a few more as we go along. Unfortunately, because of world politics, the work that was done in the early Soviet Union was not well known in the West for a long time. Some of it probably still isn't, but Vygotsky's work came to the attention of Western psychologists rather later than Piaget's. Piaget was working in Western Europe. He was very much in touch with people who were developing the computational theory of mind, whereas Vygotsky was working somewhere else and got here rather later. So the Vygotsky's theories, which have now profoundly influenced how we think about, for example, education, his influence came much later than Piaget. Now, the nature of a communist society means that Vygotsky is going to look at children differently. He's going to see them as a different kind of animal. Vygotsky was very aware of the fact that all learning is done in a social context, that is, together with others. Now, Piaget had treated development much like the blossoming of a flower, right? Everything's internal. Vygotsky is paying attention to externalities, to relations. To the extent that we can talk about inner cognitive functions, skills, and capacities, they, in Vygotsky's view, develop first in interaction with other people. It's not the case that there's preformed structures inside waiting to bud, but a lot of what you actually manage to learn to do, you learn to do first only together with other people, so it's definitely not an internal matter. But then later, as you develop a competence, it becomes internalized. So Vygotsky has this progression from the public space of interaction to the capacities of an individual. He formalized this with something with a fancy name, the Zone of Proximal Development, or ZPD. And the basic idea of this is when you're looking at a child, say the child on their own can do a bunch of stuff, call that X. But you put them together either with their peers, so with other children, or with their caretakers, family members, or teachers, and they can do more in those social contexts, called the additional stuff. Why? Well, those tasks that the child can do, but only in the presence of others, Vygotsky speaks of those as belonging to the zone of proximal development. And those skills and capacities that the child first needs support for will become internalized so that they become part of the child's personal repertoire. That's a little bit abstract. There's a nice graphic I found on the web today which conveys this in a nice intuitive fashion. Even for you, there's a bunch of stuff you can do on your own, and there's a bunch of stuff you can do with a bit of help, and there's stuff you can't do no matter what. Now, that's probably true at all times in life, but while the child is going through these first 15, 20 years of learning, the stuff that they can do with help is gradually being internalized and becoming part of the stuff they can do without help. So Vygotsky here is taking quite a different approach than Piaget. And the two approaches have profound influences for the way that you might think of an educational curriculum. You might design schools, for example. So in Piaget's case, it makes it very, very clear that you have to be sequential in the kind of challenges you set a child. There's no point in asking them to multiply if they can't add. So in developing syllabuses, we have to be very careful that there are some skills which are mastered and have to be mastered before other skills can be acquired. That's Piaget's insight, and it's a good insight and has been very influential. But Vygotsky's zone of proximal development has other consequences for how you might think about the educational situation. In order to understand what a child can do, you shouldn't, in Vygotsky's view, just look at the child shorn of all the supports that they use for accomplishing things. To understand what a child can do alone is only to understand half the child. To understand what the child can do in an appropriate interpersonal context where they have access to the resources that they will use throughout their lives, the resources of other people and materials and so on, is equally important. Now, one consequence for this, which wouldn't have been obvious from Piaget's view, is that our closed book examination practices are utterly crazy. When we take students and we lock them up in the RDS exam hall and we say, this is a closed book exam, no books, no calculators, no internet, what are we testing? We're testing a person in a pathological situation in which the usual supports for achieving anything in the world are gone. So I said Vygotsky's influence came along much later, and it still continues to reverberate. And there's been a move, for example, in the universities to move away from always testing one's knowledge with a big end of semester exam in a closed book situation, and integrating lots of other ways of assessing learning, including continuous assessment and having varied forms of evaluation and so on. And this is primarily an influence from Vygotsky. So two different perspectives, Piaget and Vygotsky, leading to different consequences, both very valuable, different and valuable. Another area where Vygotsky, in the short period of time he worked, made very valuable contributions was in considering something we've noted before, which is the way that language seems to play two roles. When we opened up the topic of language, we noted that language is about conversations, talking to people, about something that goes on between people. But we noted that it also perhaps plays a role in whatever we think thought is, that we have something like the ability to talk to ourselves. We often find ourselves, as it were, conducting an inner monologue using inner speech. Now, it's not clear who's talking to who there, is it? And that became very important in the development of the computational theory of mind. And Vygotsky added a really important piece to this puzzle. He noted, because he was looking at young children who are just starting to use language, he noted that for these first few years, there's literally no difference between thinking and speaking. They think out loud. It's only after a few years, and with the appropriate social pressures, that children learn to separate the two voices, to have one voice which is not made audible, the inner voice. And you reserve that for when you're thinking to yourself in church, for example. And if you speak out loud, you're likely to get a clip in the head. So there's a bifurcation that happens between the inner and the outer voice. And the inner language then undergoes its own kind of development. So your particular language of thought, to use Jerry Fodor's term, is probably idiosyncratic and full of your kinds of shortcuts. But Vygotsky drew this developmental process to our attention, where when we look at the adult, we have this peculiar case of language being involved in communication and in thought. And Vygotsky pointed out that, well, they have a common origin, and this internalization of speech that children do is something that they have to learn. You find children, for example, while they're still in the early stages, saying things out loud that are clearly self-directed. So when they're doing a task, they'll say things like, careful, careful, don't fall, don't fall. And those kinds of utterances are in a grey zone between public language and private language. The child is learning to adopt the values, perspectives, and concerns of people around it. So to some extent, those concerns don't start with the child. But the child is clearly talking to itself. So that was another very valuable contribution by Vygotsky, this relationship between language and thought. And finally, Vygotsky, by paying attention to what's outside the child rather than inside the child, came to a richer view of the way in which culture and personal development interact. The world is saturated with meaning. Everything around you is saturated with meaning. Doorknobs speak to you and say, open the door. A fork speaks to you and says, stab the meat. Birthday cakes appear. The world, the physical world of the human is full of meaning, and those meanings arise first in interpersonal contexts. The things in your world have meaning because you share purposes, meanings, intentions with others. And so the values that you place on things are internalizations of something which begins once more with the web of social relations which you live in. Another valuable contribution by Vygotsky. So in the first video of this series, we considered the altritional nature of the human. And we noted that there's biological development and cultural learning all going on over a long period of about 20 years. You're growing into your body, you're growing into your society, you're growing into your culture, you're growing into your language. Vygotsky's approach has been very helpful in making it clear that we, once more, cannot disentangle these two, that culture is not a separate overlay on a pre-existing biological foundation. This is the concern we'll be bringing out again and again in this topic, and it's something that has been found very nice expression in the words of the anthropologist Clifford Geertz, who, in a slightly outdated language, said, man is an animal suspended in webs of significance he himself has spun. And he says, I take culture to be those webs. That's a very nice way of looking at ourselves as the cultural animal, as it were. So those two figures, Piaget and Vygotsky, are very useful. There's a whole host of other developmental psychologists we could have looked at, but they draw out very different sets of concerns. Piaget concerned with the slow sequential progression within a child, very much individual focused. Vygotsky looking at the production of the person within a specific social, cultural, interpersonal context, looking at how the environment becomes saturated with meaning. There's lots more to say, but we only have a little bit of time, so those two landmark figures will be of great use to us. We'll be referring to them again and again.